He lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone thought they knew each other. Streets lined with small houses, trees casting long shadows over the lawns in the evenings, and neighbors waving politely when someone passed by. From the outside, his life looked ordinary. Some might have even called it peaceful. He had a job that kept him busy but didn't define him, a house that was modest but comfortable, and routines that he followed carefully. He didn't seek attention. He didn't need anyone to notice him. But what the neighbors didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that behind his calm, ordinary life was a man whose experience was shaped by situations most people would never survive, a man who had faced danger in ways few could understand, whose training and instincts were honed in the most extreme conditions imaginable. His presence alone carried the weight of countless battles, though he had no medals or trophies to show for it. The world thought of him as just another man living quietly, but in reality, he had walked through storms that would break most people, and standing beside him in every quiet moment, in every routine that passed unnoticed by the world, was his dog. The dog was not just a pet. It was a companion, a protector, and a friend, a shepherd with sharp eyes and a mind tuned to his own. The dog had been with him for years, following him everywhere, sensing his moods, reacting before words were even spoken. They understood each other in ways no one else could. It was a bond built from patience, care, and countless shared experiences, some of which the dog would never forget, and some that the man would never speak about. Their days started early. The man liked the morning, the quiet before the world fully woke. The sun would rise slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, and he would step outside with his dog by his side. They walked through the streets, not hurriedly, not with purpose beyond the simple act of being together. People would nod as they passed, but no one lingered, and that was how he liked it. He didn't want questions, didn't want curiosity. The dog, loyal as ever, trotted beside him, alert to every sound, every shift in the wind. Life had taught him the importance of routine, of awareness, of quiet observation. And the dog had learned those lessons too. Together they moved through the world carefully, always aware, always ready. But most of the time, their readiness went unnoticed, invisible under the surface of a life that looked ordinary. That invisibility was a blessing. It allowed him to live in peace, to enjoy the small things, the way sunlight touched the leaves, the smell of fresh air after rain, the simple pleasure of the dog resting its head on his foot at night. Despite his extraordinary past, he was gentle. He treated people kindly. He didn't flaunt strength, and he certainly didn't intimidate. To those who didn't know him, he was just polite, a little quiet, someone who kept to himself. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He had seen too much to need the approval of others. He had faced situations where life and death were matters of seconds, where choices had consequences far beyond personal comfort. And through all of that, he had learned one lesson above all. Loyalty mattered, and trust was rare. The dog embodied that loyalty. They shared silent conversations, a glance here, a movement there, and each knew what the other was thinking. It wasn't a magical connection, just years of shared life and mutual understanding. He had trained the dog himself, carefully and patiently, knowing that trust could never be forced. The dog had been through difficult times, moments that tested its patience and courage, and it had emerged unshaken. And when the man watched it play in the yard, running with reckless joy, he felt a rare kind of happiness. The world could be cruel, unpredictable and unforgiving, but here in his yard, with the dog leaping and rolling in the grass, life was simple and good. Neighbors often saw them outside, moving quietly, the man with a calm posture, the dog alert but relaxed. Sometimes children would run past, throwing a ball for the dog to chase. The dog would sprint, ears back, tail high, and return with the ball, dropping it at the man's feet. He would smile, pat its head, and throw the ball again. Small moments like these reminded him that life had beauty, even when it had been harsh, and those moments were fragile, precious. They reminded him why he endured, why he kept moving forward despite the shadows of the past. Evenings were quieter still. The sun dipped lower and the streets became almost empty. The man would take the dog for a slow walk, enjoying the fading light. They passed houses where lights glimmered behind curtains, where families were finishing dinners, laughing, talking. The man listened to those sounds like a distant melody, appreciative but detached. His world was different. He had lived in darkness that ordinary people would fear to imagine, And yet he found comfort in the simple rhythms of normal life, the soft padding of the dog's paws on the pavement, the cool breeze brushing past his face, the rustle of leaves in the trees. But peace, as he knew too well, was never permanent. Life had a way of testing even those who were prepared. It didn't announce itself. It came quietly, unexpectedly, in small, ordinary ways that could change everything in an instant. And one evening, that quiet was broken. It started with a knock, not harsh but firm, at the door. He hadn't been expecting anyone. The dog immediately stiffened, ears pricked, body low but ready. He glanced at the door, then down at the dog, and gave a small nod. The dog relaxed slightly, understanding that he would handle whatever was coming. It was an unspoken agreement that had carried them through many difficult situations. When he opened the door, uniformed officers were there. They wore expressions of tension and authority, eyes scanning the property as if they expected trouble. The man remained calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture aggressively. He simply asked what they wanted. The dog stayed close, alert, watching the strangers with a quiet intensity that made them pause for a moment. They explained they had received a complaint, something about noise. The man nodded, listened carefully, and explained that the dog had been resting most of the evening. He could feel the dog shifting slightly behind him, muscles tense. The officers didn't seem to notice, or perhaps they chose to ignore it. Their focus was narrow, rigid. They weren't looking for understanding, just resolution, and in their approach, there was already the seed of conflict. The man stepped back slightly, keeping his posture calm, trying to prevent the situation from escalating, but the dog, sensing the tension, barked, not out of aggression, but as a warning, a signal to its companion. And in that moment, everything changed. The officers reacted before thinking. One of them raised a weapon, shouting a command the dog didn't understand. The dog barked again, louder this time, and stepped forward protectively. The man moved to calm it, speaking in soft, familiar tones, but the situation had already spiraled beyond his control. In a fraction of a second, the unthinkable happened. A shot rang out. The dog yelped and fell. The man rushed forward, heart pounding, knees almost giving out beneath him. He dropped to the ground beside the dog, hands shaking, and felt the lifeless weight of his companion. Time slowed. The world became muted except for the sound of his own breathing, ragged and shocked. Neighbors began to appear, peering from windows and doors, whispering in confusion and fear. The officers stood back, realizing immediately that they had crossed a line. The man's eyes, calm but burning with a silent fury, met theirs. In that moment, no words were needed to convey the truth. They had made a grave mistake. But the man did not lash out. He did not retaliate. He knelt there, gently stroking the dog's fur, speaking in quiet tones that no one else could hear. His training, his instincts, his past experiences, all of it told him to remain in control, to respond with precision, not chaos. And so he remained calm, even as grief threatened to swallow him whole. The dog, loyal to the end, had been his partner in every sense. It had protected him in ways no one could understand. And now it was gone. A life taken in an instant, and yet the man's strength did not falter. He had endured too much to crumble here, though inside the pain was sharp and raw. That night, as the officers left, shaken and unsure, the man sat in the empty house, holding the memory of his companion. The silence was overwhelming, filled with the echo of pause that would never return. He thought of all the moments they had shared, the trust, the loyalty, the simple joy of each other's company. And he made a promise. Not of revenge, not of anger, but of remembrance. He would honor the dog. He would carry forward the lessons it had taught him: loyalty, courage, and unwavering companionship. And as he closed his eyes that night, he knew one thing clearly. The world had not yet seen the depth of his patience, nor the precision of his response. This was only the beginning of what would unfold. And so the quiet life that had seemed so ordinary ended not with noise or chaos, but with a deep, personal grief. Yet within that grief, a spark of resilience remained. He was a man who had survived far more than most could imagine. And though the streets were quiet, the shadows long, and the night heavy with sorrow, he was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the incident arrived slowly, with the sky painted in shades of gray and soft light that made the world look almost unreal. He woke with the weight of grief pressing down on him, heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. The dog, His companion through years of quiet mornings, long walks, and shared solitude was gone. The absence was a sharp physical ache, one that left him hollow yet fiercely aware. It was a feeling that demanded more than sorrow. It demanded a reckoning. He moved through the house silently, careful not to disturb the fragile calm that remained. Every corner reminded him of the dog, its favorite spot by the window, the worn edge of the rug where it liked to sleep, the faint smell of fur that lingered despite the cleaning. He touched these things gently, almost reverently, feeling the memory of his companion as if it were a presence in the room. For him, it wasn't just about loss. It was about betrayal by a world that didn't know and perhaps didn't care, about the lives of those who had earned their peace through struggle and discipline. He didn't call anyone. He didn't cry out. That was not his way. He had endured horrors that could have broken the strongest men, faced situations where emotions had no place, where focus and control were the only things that kept him alive. And yet, in this quiet moment, grief was a storm he could not control. He allowed it to pass over him, like waves rolling against a shore, knowing that once it subsided he would have to act. The neighborhood was already awake. From the window he could see neighbors moving about, tending to gardens, bringing in morning newspapers, stepping into their cars for commutes. The world had not stopped for him, had not paused to recognize the depth of his pain. That was a truth he had learned long ago. Life did not wait, and it rarely accounted for fairness. But still, he watched quietly, aware that the world outside could never understand the full measure of what had happened. When the officers returned to the station, their mood was tense. Something about the situation unsettled them in ways they could not articulate. Their actions the night before had been impulsive, almost instinctive, and now that instinct faced scrutiny. One officer tried to rationalize what had happened, saying it was a matter of self-protection, of following protocol. Another argued that they were simply doing their jobs. But unease lingered, a silent acknowledgement that they had crossed an invisible boundary. Meanwhile, he moved carefully through his life, making no overt gestures of anger or retaliation. He understood the importance of patience. Rushing to action, reacting without thought, could be dangerous. He had lived his life in moments where seconds determined survival, where measured responses mattered more than immediate emotion. And though grief threatened to cloud his judgment, he held it at bay, using it instead as fuel for what needed to come next. News began to circulate quietly. Some neighbors had witnessed parts of the incident, whispers spreading like wind through the streets. They spoke of the man's calm, the dog's loyalty, the shock of the sudden tragedy. The story grew in fragments, each retelling slightly different, some exaggerating the fear, others emphasizing the quiet dignity with which he had handled the situation. And as these fragments moved through the neighborhood, the man remained at home, watching, listening, waiting. He did not seek attention, but he understood the power of presence, the way perception could shape events before any words were spoken. The man's mind went over the events again and again. He analyzed every movement, every sound, every reaction. The dog's bark, the officer's commands, the flash of the gun. He did not dwell in anger, not yet. Instead, he observed, strategy had always been his way. Understanding before action, analysis before decision. The principles that had kept him alive in the deadliest situations were still relevant, even here, in what was ostensibly a simple misunderstanding in a quiet neighborhood. By midday, he had made his decision. He would engage, but on his terms. The officers had acted without full knowledge, without context, without understanding the bond that had existed between man and dog, without understanding who they had confronted. He knew he had to assert that understanding, to ensure accountability not through violence but through awareness and consequence, and he would do it methodically. He would make them understand the mistake not through anger, but through clarity, through presence, through the undeniable weight of his experience. He began documenting everything. His phone and notebook became tools of precision. Times, actions, words, gestures. Witness accounts were collected quietly, respectfully, ensuring that the narrative could not be misrepresented. Every detail mattered. The officers had acted in haste. He would act with deliberation. He was calm, precise, and unwavering. Those who had underestimated him would soon learn the cost of assumption. As evening approached, he took a slow walk through the streets, alone now, carrying only the memory of his companion. Each step was deliberate, each breath was measured. He observed the world with the same intensity that the dog had once mirrored back at him. The houses, the cars, the people moving through their routines, all of it seemed ordinary yet fragile. The balance of life could be shattered in an instant, as he had learned painfully the night before. He carried that lesson in every step, in every thought. At the station, tension was building. Supervisors and higher authorities had been alerted to the incident. Protocols were being reviewed. Something about this case had triggered a different kind of attention. It was not the usual review. There was an instinctive unease among the officers, a recognition that the man they had confronted was not ordinary. His record, though classified, was beginning to ripple through channels that should have remained private. And as it moved, the officers realized that their understanding of the situation was incomplete. Meanwhile, the man remained composed. He did not flaunt his experience. He did not threaten. He allowed the situation to unfold, observing the reactions, measuring the awareness and understanding of those around him. He had seen how chaos could arise from ignorance, and he knew the power of calm and clarity. That power was his weapon now, more than any firearm or tactical skill. He understood that authority could be challenged without confrontation, and respect could be demanded without aggression. The story of the dog, his unwavering companion, began to spread further. People spoke of the bond they had shared, of the loyalty that transcended ordinary understanding. Social media quietly picked up whispers of the incident, small posts that hinted at tragedy, without revealing the full truth. The man did not seek publicity, but he understood its effect. Public awareness would create pressure, and pressure would ensure accountability. He navigated these currents with care, ensuring that emotion did not cloud strategy. Late at night, he returned to his home, exhausted but unbroken. The house was empty, silent except for the faint memories of the dog. He moved through the rooms with deliberate care, ensuring that every trace of the companion was remembered respectfully. He spoke quietly to the empty air, as though the dog could hear him, as though the bond still lingered alive in memory. He understood the depth of grief, but he also understood the need for purpose. Action, not despair, would honor what had been lost. He began to reach out to people he trusted quietly and carefully. Former colleagues, those who understood the weight of his experience and the precision of his instincts. He did not boast. He did not dramatize. He simply conveyed the facts, ensuring that those who could help were aware of the situation. Connections were made not through noise or drama, but through calm, measured communication. The story was building slowly but inevitably, and the officers who had acted recklessly would soon understand the full measure of what they had done. In the days that followed, the man maintained his routine, outwardly calm, inwardly intense. Every interaction, every step was deliberate. He did not confront recklessness with impulsive anger. He used the tools he had honed over years: observation, patience, precision, and discipline. He understood that the world rarely allowed for mistakes to go unpunished, and he ensured that his response would be proportional, controlled, and inevitable. Neighbors continued to whisper. They noticed the quiet resolve in his posture, the way he moved through the streets alone, focused but unassuming. Some wondered if they had misunderstood the events of the previous night. Others felt a vague unease, a recognition that they had brushed against a life far more intense and capable than their own. And in that quiet, the man moved through the world like a shadow of discipline and resolve, every step a reflection of a life shaped by extraordinary circumstances. He remembered the dog constantly, its loyalty, its courage, its unwavering presence. He understood that grief was a teacher, one that demanded both humility and strength. He did not allow anger to rule him, not yet. He allowed respect for the past, for the bond that had existed, and for the lessons learned to guide his actions. And in that he found clarity. The officers, now aware of the growing attention and scrutiny, were uncertain. Protocols, regulations, and chains of command were being questioned. They realized that they had acted without understanding, without awareness, and that the consequences would not be simple or quiet. The man they had confronted was not someone to be underestimated, and the cost of their assumptions was becoming apparent. By the end of the week, the narrative had shifted. The man's composure, his calculated response, and the undeniable loyalty of his dog became the focus. Public opinion, subtle but persistent, began to form. The story was no longer just about a dog being shot. It was about respect, about accountability, about understanding the weight of actions in a world that too often acted without comprehension. And in all of this, the man remained patient, letting the truth rise slowly, letting consequence follow action. Through all of this, he did not seek revenge. That was not his way. He understood the power of controlled response, the importance of precision, the need for clarity and calm. He would ensure justice in a measured, deliberate way, without chaos, without unnecessary conflict. And as the week closed, he sat quietly in his home, remembering the dog, reflecting on the bonds that defined life, and preparing for the steps that would follow. The story was no longer just his private grief. It was becoming a matter of awareness, a lesson in understanding, and a demonstration of patience and strength. And though the world outside remained unaware of the full measure of his experience, those who had crossed him would soon realize that their actions had consequences far beyond what they could imagine. Days had passed since the incident, but the man's world had not returned to quiet. If anything, the tension seemed heavier now, as though the air itself remembered the night that had changed everything. Inside his home, the walls carried the echoes of the past, the silence broken only by the memory of his companion. Yet he did not allow despair to claim him. Grief, he knew, was a tool as much as it was a burden. It sharpened the mind, it demanded focus, it forced clarity. He spent hours reflecting, not on what had been lost in the moment, but on what would follow. The officers had acted without understanding, without foresight, and their actions had consequences. In the past, such recklessness in the field had ended careers or worse. Yet he did not approach the situation with immediate anger. His training, his experience, and the countless hours spent in high-pressure environments had taught him the value of restraint. He had learned that patience could be more powerful than aggression, that calm could be more intimidating than force. His mind replayed the events from multiple angles. He remembered the first knock on the door, the tension in the officers' movements, the way their eyes scanned the property as if the world belonged to them alone. He recalled the dog's instinctive reaction, the way it had positioned itself, protective yet disciplined, responding to a danger only it could sense. The flash of the gun, the moment of silence afterward, and then the sheer weight of the loss. Each memory was precise, detailed, and vivid. He cataloged them carefully as he always did, knowing that clarity would be his advantage. Outside, the neighborhood continued its routines, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. People walked dogs, tended gardens, and waved at one another with the casual politeness of those who believed life was predictable. They had no idea how quickly ordinary days could unravel, how fragile the illusion of safety could be. To them, he appeared calm, almost detached, moving through the streets with the measured pace of someone who had endured far more than anyone could see. The world had a tendency to overlook quiet power, and he used that to his advantage. The officers, meanwhile, were growing uneasy. Reports and whispers had reached their superiors, and suddenly, the incident was no longer a minor complaint, but a matter of scrutiny. Questions were asked that could not be answered with simple explanations. Protocols were examined, timelines reviewed, and every detail of their actions dissected. Their confidence wavered. Something about the man they had confronted unsettled them. It was more than grief, more than anger. It was a presence, a calm intensity that hinted at experience they could not comprehend. The man anticipated their reactions. He had studied people for years, understanding behavior, predicting movements, and sensing hesitation. He knew that authority often reacted out of ego rather than reason, that panic or guilt could make people act irrationally. He used that knowledge now, staying visible but restrained, letting the officers and their superiors understand, without a word, that they had underestimated him. That alone was enough to create unease. Late one afternoon, he received an unexpected visitor. A former colleague, someone who understood the depth of his past, approached with a quiet caution. They did not speak of ordinary matters. Their conversation was precise, calculated, and silent in its intensity. Information was shared in careful doses, not as threats, but as reminders. The man's life, it seemed, was connected to networks and histories that few outside that world could even imagine. The incident with the dog had triggered a recognition, a ripple that moved through circles he had thought were distant and dormant. He listened quietly, absorbing every detail, every nuance. His mind worked as it always had, analyzing, calculating, planning. There was no rage in him now, only the clear understanding that his next steps had to be deliberate. The officers had acted recklessly, but that did not mean they were invincible. Every mistake, every misjudgment would have consequences, and he would ensure those consequences were measured, precise, and undeniable. As evening fell, he walked through the neighborhood once again. The streets were quieter now, the sun casting long shadows over the houses. He remembered the dog at his side, running, leaping, alert yet joyous. The memory was bittersweet, a reminder of loss and loyalty, but it also fueled his determination. The dog had been his partner in countless ways, and its absence was a reminder that responsibility could never be ignored. He had survived impossible situations before, and this would be no different. The officers, meanwhile, were starting to feel the pressure of their own actions. Supervisors had been informed, and the administrative weight of the incident was pressing down. They realized, in a creeping sense of dread, that they had confronted someone far more capable than they could comprehend. They had assumed authority would be sufficient, that training and protocol would protect them. But experience, skill, and a lifetime of discipline had created a presence that could not be easily dismissed. The man they had faced was not ordinary, and the cost of their assumptions was becoming increasingly clear. In his home, he reviewed his own plans carefully. He did not rush. He did not react impulsively. Patience was his weapon, as it always had been. He created a timeline of events, anticipated the officers' next moves, and prepared for every possible scenario. His preparation was meticulous, informed by years of training where even the smallest detail could determine survival. And as he moved through these plans, his grief remained a quiet undercurrent, fueling focus rather than clouding judgment. He reached out to a few trusted contacts quietly and cautiously, ensuring that those who could provide guidance or support were aware of the situation. He did not seek an army. He did not want confrontation. He wanted understanding, accountability, and resolution. And yet, through these interactions, the officers' errors were becoming impossible to ignore. The story, carefully conveyed, began to take on weight beyond the initial complaint. Public awareness, official scrutiny, and professional oversight started to converge, creating pressure the officers could not easily escape. Late at night, he sat in silence, reflecting on the dog and what it had meant to him. Loyalty, courage, companionship, all were embodied in the life that had been taken. But grief alone was not enough. It would not bring peace. Action, precise and deliberate, was required. He reviewed the events repeatedly, cataloging movements, words, and responses. Every piece of information mattered. The officers had acted without understanding, and their reckoning would not be immediate, but it would be certain. Neighbors noticed subtle changes in the man's behavior. He remained outwardly calm, polite even, but there was a quiet intensity in the way he moved, an unspoken awareness that something significant had shifted. People whispered, speculated, and some even feared him without understanding why. The world often overlooked the quiet power of those who had endured beyond measure, and he used that invisibility as a tool. It allowed him to prepare without interference, to observe without disruption, and to ensure that when action came, it would be inevitable. The officers grew increasingly restless. Meetings, reports, and administrative inquiries consumed their days. Each question they faced revealed gaps in understanding, mistakes in judgment, and a failure to anticipate consequences. They began to realize that their actions had engaged someone far more capable than a routine complaint could account for. Their unease was compounded by the realization that the man's past, though largely unknown to them, carried influence, skill, and a precision that could not be ignored. In quiet moments, the man reflected on the concept of loyalty. The dog had been unwavering, a partner in every sense, Its death was a lesson, a reminder that those bonds demanded respect and that betrayal, even unintentional, had weight. His response would honor that loyalty. It would be precise, controlled, and inevitable. And he knew that through measured action, he could ensure that the lesson was understood by those who had crossed the line. As the week progressed, small signs of awareness began to appear in the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered about the man's composure, his quiet presence, and the way he seemed to command attention without speaking. Stories of the incident with the dog circulated subtly, shaping perceptions without exaggeration. The man did not seek recognition, but he understood that perception could create pressure and pressure could enforce accountability. He used these dynamics carefully, letting truth rise in its own time. One afternoon, a letter arrived, official and formal, requesting his account of the incident. He read it carefully, noting every word, every implication, and every procedural expectation. He did not react with haste. Instead, he prepared meticulously, reviewing events, documenting details, and crafting a response that was clear, factual, and undeniable. Every sentence, every fact would carry the weight of truth. And in that clarity, the officer's errors would become impossible to dismiss. Night fell again, and he sat by the window, gazing at the empty streets. The absence of the dog was still sharp, but his resolve had strengthened. He understood that strength was not only physical or tactical, it was mental, emotional, and moral. He had endured far greater challenges than the loss of a companion, and he would endure this as well. The officer's assumptions had set the stage, and now patience, precision, and the undeniable weight of experience would guide the unfolding events. As the city slept, he planned the next steps. Observing the officers, anticipating their reactions, and preparing his statements, all were done with care and foresight. He would ensure that accountability was achieved, not through violence, but through the undeniable clarity of truth. His past had taught him that control was a form of power, and he wielded it now quietly, deliberately, and effectively. The dog's memory lingered in every moment, every thought, every breath. Its loyalty, courage, and presence were constants in a world that often overlooked quiet strength. And in honoring that memory, he found purpose. He understood that the path forward would require patience, precision, and the quiet, unyielding force of discipline. The officers had underestimated him, and that mistake would become evident in time. By the end of Part 3, the man had positioned himself with clarity, patience, and strategic foresight. His grief had transformed into focus. His memory of the dog had become both motivation and compass. The officers, unaware of the depth of what they had encountered, were beginning to feel the first stirrings of consequence. And though the world outside remained unaware of the full story, the balance had shifted. The stage was set, and the reckoning, inevitable and precise, would unfold in due course. The following days were heavy with quiet intensity. The man moved through his life as if nothing had happened, but beneath that calm surface, everything had changed. Each action, each glance was measured and deliberate. His home felt emptier than ever, the absence of his dog echoing in the hallways and on the worn rug where the dog had once rested. That emptiness, however, was not weakness. It was a reminder, a driving force, and a compass. Every memory of his companion strengthened his resolve and sharpened his focus. The neighborhood continued its routines, unaware of the storm building just beneath the surface. Children played on lawns, neighbors watered gardens, and cars rolled down streets lined with familiar houses. To anyone else, life seemed ordinary. To him, every detail mattered. He noticed the slight shift in the wind, the way shadows fell across the pavement, the subtle changes in the neighborhood's rhythm. These were the small things others ignored, but they held importance to him. Awareness had always been his edge, his survival mechanism, and he relied on it now more than ever. The officers involved in the incident were beginning to feel the pressure. Their superiors had been alerted, and the inquiry was intensifying. The man's calm, composed demeanor, combined with the growing awareness of his background, had created unease. He did not flaunt his experience, but subtle hints had reached the right places, enough to make those in authority sit up and take notice. The officers found themselves under scrutiny they had not anticipated. Routine procedures had suddenly become complicated, accountability now unavoidable. Inside his home, he reviewed everything in detail. Every part of the night that had changed his life was examined, every word, every movement, every reaction catalogued meticulously. He was methodical, precise, and unwavering. The dog had been his partner in countless situations, and its loss demanded more than grief. It demanded clarity and action. Not revenge, not malice, but the deliberate force of truth and consequence. He understood the delicate balance of power, the subtle ways authority could be challenged, and he relied on these lessons now. The officers tried to regain their footing, but uncertainty clouded their confidence. Meetings were tense, reports scrutinized, and questions asked that they could not answer easily. Every action of the previous night was dissected, every decision replayed and judged. They began to realize, in a growing sense of dread, that they had miscalculated the situation entirely. They had confronted someone whose experience and capability far exceeded their understanding. Their assumptions, based on appearances and routine expectations, had led them into a situation they were unprepared to manage. The man remained calm. His grief was private, internal, and it did not control him. Instead, it strengthened him. He reached out quietly to a few trusted individuals who understood the depth of his past, those who had witnessed his skills and knew the kind of precision he brought to every situation. There were no alarms, no threats, no dramatics, only careful, deliberate communication. Information flowed in measured amounts, enough to ensure awareness without causing unnecessary alarm. He had learned long ago that subtlety and restraint often commanded more power than overt force. As the days unfolded, subtle changes began in the neighborhood. People noticed the man's presence, his quiet authority, the way he seemed to command attention without speaking. Stories about the incident spread cautiously, whispers that carried details of loyalty, courage, and the extraordinary bond between a man and his dog. No exaggeration, no spectacle, just the truth, and that alone gave the story weight. Awareness grew. Curiosity became concern. Respect, though unspoken, began to form. The officers, meanwhile, felt the growing consequences of their actions. Internal reviews, formal inquiries, and unofficial whispers in the department reminded them that mistakes could not be ignored. The man's reputation, though largely unknown to them, cast a shadow they could not see but could feel. They had acted impulsively without understanding, and now every detail of their decisions was under scrutiny. The unease that had been simmering began to solidify into fear, subtle, persistent, and unavoidable. One afternoon, the man received a call from someone in authority, a voice measured, formal, acknowledging the situation but careful not to provoke unnecessary conflict. It was a reminder that even unseen experience carried weight, that skill and discipline were recognized by those who understood their value. The conversation was brief, precise, and professional. He did not boast. He did not threaten. He simply conveyed the facts as he always had, letting the truth carry its own power. Evenings became a time for reflection and preparation. He walked the street slowly, observing, noting, remembering. Every interaction, every pattern in the neighborhood was catalogued mentally. The dog had taught him lessons in loyalty, awareness, and discipline, and those lessons were now guiding every decision. He was methodical, not impulsive, and that methodical approach made his presence undeniable even to those who could not yet comprehend it. Neighbors whispered about the man's calm, about the quiet determination they sensed in him. They noticed the way he moved through the streets, solitary but purposeful. Some felt a subtle unease, a recognition that there was more to him than met the eye. They didn't know what he had endured, or the skills that shaped his every decision, but instinct told them that this was someone who demanded attention and respect, even without raising his voice. The officers attempted to regain control, but the man's quiet influence spread. Reports reached higher levels of authority. Inquiries intensified, and slowly the truth began to emerge. His background, once hidden, started to surface in ways that could not be ignored. Those who knew him understood the magnitude of his experience, the precision of his training, and the unyielding discipline he carried. The officers, realizing the depth of what they had encountered, grew increasingly anxious. They had assumed they were in control, that authority and protocol were sufficient shields, but those assumptions were being dismantled piece by piece. At home, he planned every step carefully. He documented the events in detail, preparing statements that were factual, precise, and irrefutable. He ensured that witnesses, timelines, and evidence were organized, leaving no room for misinterpretation. He did not need dramatics or theatrics. His credibility, his clarity, and the undeniable reality of the incident would speak for themselves. Every action was deliberate, every decision measured. The dog's memory guided him, reminding him of loyalty, courage, and the importance of standing firm. The officers felt the increasing weight of scrutiny. Conversations in the station were tense, whispers laced with concern, eyes darting nervously as they considered the potential consequences. They had underestimated the man, assuming that routine authority was enough to manage any situation. Now, faced with the reality of his experience, skill, and composure, they realized their error. The environment they had relied on, control, procedure, intimidation, was crumbling under the subtle but undeniable influence of someone they could not control. The man reached out to a few trusted individuals outside the immediate situation, people who understood his approach and could offer advice without complicating matters. These interactions were deliberate, calculated, and discreet. No one outside that circle needed to know the full truth, but those who did understood the precision and discipline he brought to every circumstance. He moved like a shadow, silent and observant, letting the consequences of actions unfold naturally. By midweek, public awareness had begun to grow. Neighbors who had witnessed parts of the incident spoke quietly to friends and colleagues, sharing what they knew without embellishment. The story of the dog, loyal to the very end, and the man's calm, controlled response began to take shape. Public curiosity was gentle but persistent, enough to apply pressure without drawing chaos. The man understood the effect. Awareness created accountability, and he had cultivated both without a single loud word. The officers attempted to navigate the scrutiny, but their efforts were clumsy. Every statement, every explanation revealed gaps in understanding, mistakes in judgment, and the consequences of their impulsive actions. They were learning, slowly, that appearances could be deceiving, that calmness could carry power far beyond visible force, and that reckoning, when prepared, could arrive silently but completely. The man's grief remained a quiet undercurrent, but it no longer overwhelmed him. It had transformed into purpose. Every memory of the dog, every lesson learned through years of discipline and experience, guided his actions. He moved through the days with precision, observing, planning, and preparing for the inevitable consequences of the officer's errors. He understood that power was not only physical or tactical, it was moral, mental, and emotional. The dog's loyalty had taught him that, and he applied it now with unerring skill. By the end of Part 4, the officers were beginning to realize the true depth of the situation. They had acted without understanding, assumed control where they had none, and now faced scrutiny they could not easily escape. The man, calm, composed, and deliberate, had created a situation in which truth and accountability were inevitable. His background, once hidden, now influenced every step, every perception, every action in ways the officers could not yet fully comprehend. And though the world outside continued its ordinary routines, the stage had shifted, the balance altered, and the reckoning, silent yet inevitable, was approaching.